Hello, welcome back to the Evergreen RX. I'm your host, Hayden, licensed mental health therapist, Cancer Moon, and the first to get deep at any party. So this is another think piece, if I can call it that. This is a little exploration of a topic that has been on my mind recently, kind of like the AI episode I did lately, which if you haven't checked that one out, go ahead and do that after this episode. I'll have it linked below. Just sharing my thoughts on AI and how that influences our life, and kind of from like a therapy, psychological lens, but also just ethical quandary and personal opinion kind of thing. And this is going to be in a similar vein because it's a topic that has just really been on my mind so much that I felt like if I'm interested in it, you guys might be too. If you're new here, you're just now catching on. That's kind of how I've been deciding episodes lately. It's the same kind of intention with the Dear Evergreen episodes when I get questions from you guys. The thought is, what are we all thinking about? What are we all kind of grappling with, or trying to reflect on, introspect about, and how can I help you guys along on that journey through my platform, and also learn from y'all as well, because there's really interesting questions and thoughts and things that would never cross my mind as topics that I've heard from you guys, and I love that. So no question from a listener today, but if you would like to submit one, reach out to me at theevergreenrx@gmail.com or text me or call me at 512-655-9888, and maybe you'll hear your question or your topic featured in an episode very soon. I am rapidly approaching the end of season 5, however, and I will be taking a break as I do between seasons. This break is a little bit undetermined. I'm not exactly sure when the pod will be coming back, but it will be coming back. Don't you worry. I will be ending this season on 99 episodes. And it might not look like that because I had mini doses I did for a while and they got numbered differently, but it will be 99 episodes, which is kind of funny. And so who knows, what will I do for my 100th episode? But just be sure to follow so you don't miss it, and you'll get notified when I do upload. And obviously over on my socials at the Evergreen RX, you can keep up with me there as well. And then you will know when I post, which is great. So I'm talking about a concept today called moral grandstanding. I'm not even sure where I learned about this concept, when this word kind of came into my lexicon. I wish I did know, because it seems kind of specific. And as I was doing research for this episode, there's not a ton of conversation online about moral grandstanding and kind of its role in the modern digital social media age. Grandstanding is a concept that has been used heavily for a long time, but this new kind of usage, moral grandstanding, the way that plays into like performative activism and cancel culture, I don't see as much discourse about. So I'll do my best to kind of explain it and share my reflections and thoughts about how it works when it comes to cancel culture and social media kind of outrages, and maybe how that's affecting our ability to actually engage with the things that we care about in a meaningful way, or leading to that burnout that I think a lot of us are feeling through being online and having access to so much information, a lot of times really tragic, horrible information, stories of things that are happening around the world, or behaviors that certain individuals partake in, that can kind of lead to this overwhelming sense of outrage and burnout. So that's what I'll be talking about, but in no ways am I an expert on this topic, nor have I really gotten to fully flesh out my research or thoughts about it. In the past, that might have stopped me from making this episode. Like, it feels like such an important topic, and maybe one where I could misspeak or be misconstrued as like not believing that the things that are happening that people are outraged about are justified to be outraged about, which is not what I'm trying to say at all. And I'm letting go of that fear and that need to kind of be completely sure or stay in the safe zone of, acceptable topics where I could not get any backlash, like talking about like mindfulness or healthy habits, New Year's resolutions, like things where most likely I'm not going to get a ton of backlash. I think part of the reason I'm so afraid of that is because of this concept of moral grandstanding, and a lot of us are afraid of that, even just in our personal lives. Even if we don't have a following or put content out for mass consumption, there is a culture now around like kind of mob mentality, like burn them at the stakes, let's all go persecute this one person for this thing that we believe is morally unjust, or that we think we are so virtuous and above ever doing something so appalling, or making such a claim that is so tone deaf as this person that we are persecuting. And define moral grandstanding. I found 2 different definitions online and decided to kind of take the parts that I liked the best to help understand this concept. So, moral grandstanding is the use of moral talk, public discussions, or social media posts to boost one's own reputation, status, or brand, rather than or in addition to a genuine care for a cause. It involves performing moral outrage or excessive virtue to impress peers, often appearing as a form of virtue signaling or performative activism. So, what is this saying? This is the idea of engaging in public discussion or discourse as a means to serve our own perception or brand or reputation, as this says, in a positive light, to be viewed as virtuous or morally sound by other people, and to kind of assert our view and our moral disposition onto others that we believe are wrong or corrupt for having a belief that is different from our own. And a caveat that I made to this definition is doing that behavior or engaging in this public discourse solely as a concern for reputation and not as a genuine care of a cause. Through research, in my own opinion, I think that they can be more combined. There is a genuine care for something or a genuine outrage for an injustice that we see going on in the world. And the behavior, the way that we go about posting about it or talking about it, is in a way related to this moral grandstanding, like wanting to appear really virtuous, wanting to appear favorable in the eyes of our peers. So it's not just out of an altruistic desire to post about a cause that you care about. And so I think the really important distinction here is it's not a problem about having morals or caring about the issues that we do or wanting to see our virtues reflected in the world around us. That is not really the problem. It's about how we go about doing that, the actions that are taken, like it says, an excessive show of virtue or moral outrage to kind of represent or project out into the world those moral beliefs. Justin Tosi and Brandon Warmke are, I think, like the 2 guys really talking about this. They have a book called Grandstanding, and I'll have it linked below. But a quote from them says, "To grandstand is to turn one's contribution to public discourse into a vanity project." So the goal with moral grandstanding, and a lot of this is unconscious, right? Like this is not usually a conscious project for people. Maybe if it's more like we're somewhere on the spectrum in the family of narcissistic behaviors. But obviously, most of us have some narcissistic behaviors or attributes, even though we're not narcissistic. So it's a spectrum, and it's not really, for most of us, I believe, an overt thing that we're doing. But as I'll get into later in the episode, it has negative consequences, this behavior of engaging in moral grandstanding. And the idea of talking about it or defining it, why I want to make an episode about it, is to bring some more awareness to this behavior. And I'll be honest, making this episode, I started typing some things out and looking at, there's like 5 different types of grandstanding that I'll get into. And I was like, oh my God, I do this. And is making this episode a version of moral grandstanding? Like, I'm teaching you guys about this thing that you shouldn't do because it has negative repercussions and is performative. Is that performative? Is that moral grandstanding? I'm really kind of like recognizing and bringing more awareness of this behavior even for myself. And some of the inspiration behind this, because I'll get into examples of, like, in popular culture, examples where we see this happening, like in the, Justin Baldoni and Blake Lively case, or during COVID, examples in our modern culture where this happens a lot. And, the inspiration to talk about this concept was, I think, in a way, out of some of my own moral grandstanding I was engaging in around these topics and with people in my life. Sure, I wasn't making it a super public discourse. That's just not really my MO. But in relationships and people that I was engaging with that had different views, there was a part of me that felt kind of a moral hierarchy to them, because I felt like I was on the right side of the discourse and was outraged or couldn't believe that they would have a different view. So, with that being said, what are the types of moral grandstanding according to Tosi and Warmke? One is piling on. This is the typical behavior we think about with cancel culture, like just an onslaught of voices all saying the same thing. And, an example that was given when I was looking this up was like, if everyone is in agreement that there should be like a petition made, a petition against, the new pipeline that they want to create in your city, and everyone is saying, yes, there should be a petition, this is wrong, this is affecting the climate, and then someone stands up and says, to echo what I'm hearing, I also believe that this is a horrible atrocity to the climate and whatever. Like, kind of adding more noise to a consensus that is already largely shared. Kind of what is the contribution of adding your voice echoing the same point that is already being stated. And I can hear in my head already some arguments, rebuttals to that point of piling on. Like, it's important to come together to create a mass of people talking about the same thing and, petitioning or protesting for, something that is unjust to be held to justice or, accountability or whatever. I get that. But there is this specific idea of piling on and public shame that can come to, a fever pitch. And sometimes not in accordance. A lot of these examples we'll see are not really in accordance or alignment with the original crime, quote unquote, like kind of disproportionate response. So then there's ramping up. So this is engaging in a kind of one-upping. So increasing punishments as a proof of their commitment to justice. It's not enough to call someone out for their problematic behavior, but then you're like calling their employer, trying to get them to lose their job. It's where, the usual punishment for a minor distasteful action turns into, a ramping up, a continuing of, wanting legal action taken against someone, just continuing to up the ante on punishment, and it's never enough. There's also trumping up. So accruing status by showing that you notice what others miss. So someone might be really angry about Bernie Sanders drinking a Coke because Coke does things like fund Colombian death squads. This is an example in an article that I read that I'll have linked below. And it may be true, but it's frivolous to just pin that on Bernie Sanders. You know, like it's getting caught up in these small things as a way to show that you are so tuned to what is morally bankrupt or unjust in someone else's behavior. I definitely think I can be a culprit of that sometimes, like really going in or highlighting that I have caught something that is more nuanced and insidious that other people are not recognizing. That's problematic. You know, I think an example of a place in which I can do this would be something like the Bechdel test. If you're familiar with that, with movies, it's just like a set of rules about female representation, and a movie has to feature two women who talk to each other about something other than a man. And I had a thought pop up when watching Heated Rivalry, like, I wonder if it passes the Bechdel test. Sure, I could get caught up on that. I'm not actually really sure if it does pass the Bechdel test, but that's probably okay given the other things that it's tackling and the point of the show. And, you know, getting really caught up on that one point and kind of bringing it up in conversation when someone says that they really like Heated Rivalry or whatever. If I have a problem with it, like, it's a little bit status kind of thing versus maybe an actual valuable point that I'd be making. Another type of moral grandstanding is excessive emotional displays. So a lot of things that are happening in our world right now call for, you know, an emotional reaction and display. Like, that is okay. There's a lot of horrible, devastating, heartbreaking things that are happening. But the idea of an excessive kind of outrage or emotional reaction that then gets put out either through writing or through talking into the public discourse, that's another sign of moral grandstanding. And the last one are claims of self-evidence. I also do this a lot. This is the point in the research where I was like, oh my God, wait, am I moral grandstanding? Like, is that what this podcast episode is? Like, the claims of self-evidence I could really relate to. Like, it's this kind of belief, like your position is the only logical one. Like, you can't believe that anyone would view the situation any differently. And this is used to make others feel wrong. Not just immoral, but wrong. Like they have some kind of dumb opinion or viewpoint. And definitely when it comes to some pop culture issues, I can find myself feeling that and pulling, you know, well, I am therapist and I know human behavior and can distinguish in some way right or wrong to a better degree and know who deserves empathy and when and how, and, you know, what situations are more clear cut on how it is racist or misogynistic to view things in a different light. An example would be like anyone with a heart would agree. Anyone that has any shred of empathy would agree. And, you know, I don't catch myself saying things directly, but I think sometimes the internal experience or the motivation behind why I might be getting heated with someone about something, or, you know, wanting to take that extra step, make that extra point to them, show them that they're wrong, like I can definitely feel that desire coming up. And sometimes I have awareness to pivot and not act out of that place, and other times I don't. So definitely could feel myself on that. And so, you know, these are all just different examples of this behavior, but one that I think is embedded that really made me want to talk about this concept as it relates to pop culture and you know, the kind of social issues that we find ourselves getting caught up in all the time, is this idea of being holier than thou, like a self-righteous or moralizing attitude where you can act superior or sanctimonious or more virtuous than others. Being holier than thou is, showing off your piety or your ethical standards to other people while you're also judging them or condescending them. There was a quote from one of the articles that says, look at any social media post that has more than a dozen responses. Inevitably, one of them will attack the original post on the basis of some perceived moral transgression. And I think this is so true. Anytime you're on Instagram or TikTok, I always scroll the comments basically looking for the outrage. I'm so used to it now that it's oh God, what is it going to be? Something that they were wearing, a product that they were consuming, the way that they were eating, the way they were talking about, an experience that they had, whether it's a hardship or a good experience. We see this all the time, how tone deaf that you would post this while people are starving, or yeah, you're so privileged to be able to work from home. There are people that have to, work on their feet for 12 hours a day, stuff like that, where it's just really condemning other people for their behavior while maybe not taking the time or the space to reflect on our own behavior, some of the hypocrisy embedded in that, or just finger pointing and blaming that doesn't do anything for anyone. It just creates more hate and hurt and division and cynicism. There also seems to be some type of social obligation to post about the latest crisis and kind of check that off your list. Whenever the fires in California last year were happening, obviously devastating, deserves attention. There's a reason to be emotionally affected by those that were losing their home, by the environmental destruction, to have an outpouring of donations and help and support and to get the word out there. Obviously, there is something really good embedded in that. But then we see, people all posting kind of the same exact thing and saying the same words, using the same language. And sometimes I wonder, it's is this a checklist? I need to show that I care about this, so here, I'll post about it. That is in service of our reputation or the way that we're viewed in the eyes of others. So more examples would be the fixation on jet usage of individuals, really calling certain celebrities out on their private jet usage, tracking, making comparisons to other celebrities that are seen as on a more kind of moral high ground of not flying private jets. Is it an important topic? Yes. Is calling out one individual on their jet usage the place we need to be directing all of our anger and outrage? Maybe not. Later I'll get to this, but there is something about the exhaustion that we can feel. It's called outrage exhaustion through constantly having things to be upset about and not placing them kind of properly on the scale. A company that is repeatedly, egregiously on a large scale using child labor. Yeah, let's direct a little bit more attention that way. And we don't really have energy left over a lot of times for the things that really do matter, or the real injustices are getting kind of swept up and forgotten about because of this constant outrage cycle that is sometimes focusing on single individuals and using that as a place to morally grandstand and show how we're so much better than them. When really, how many of those of us that are posting about this or talking about it online have enough money to be able to fly in a private jet, or have enough acclaim and status to deal with security threats when going to public airports or flying on commercial jets? We don't actually know what we would do in those situations, and we can feel really morally superior or really secure in our viewpoint when we're just pointing the finger at other people. So like I mentioned, I found I find a lot of this to be showing up in the Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni case that's currently going on. That was kind of the inspiration behind this episode. And I uncovered my own moral grandstanding around this issue through researching and wanting to talk about it, because for me, I've been really upset about the treatment of Blake Lively through this whole case. I've made a lot of arguments about how it feels really misogynistic. This is always what happens. Can you find a single case of a woman speaking out against an injustice that she feels a notable man acted against her, and where she was believed off the bat? You know, there's not many cases, if any, of that happening. Usually, you know, it's guilty until proven innocent, and even sometimes that doesn't do enough to redeem the woman's reputation. And that really does touch on things that I care about. You know, I'm a feminist. I get affected by these things. I hate seeing this mob mentality go after public figures for things that people just decide that they don't like about them, that Blake Lively is annoying or controlling, that she's like a bad hang. It's like, well, you know, to me, that doesn't really seem relevant in the case of sexual assault or harassment. It's like, it doesn't really matter whether you like her or not. So I don't get why that's a part of an argument, and it definitely gets me upset. And I can find myself leaning towards some of the holier than thou or self-evidence of, you know, how do you not see that this is the same thing that always plays out? That this is patriarchal and misogynistic in essence, that there is, you know, a lot of problems, whether it's true or not. The cases made against Baldoni, there's a lot of problem in the way that it's handling in this, you know, crusade going after a woman and her personality, and, you know, whether or not you like her in response to her, you know, feeling mistreated or claiming that against a male celebrity. So it finds, to me, it can feel so self-evident. Like, if you just don't see that, then you are misogynistic. And, you know, I think this is where we get into the nuance of like having an opinion, having beliefs and morals that guide you in the things that you get upset about and where you stand on certain issues, versus how you go about sharing those issues, how you go about having those conversations with people in your life that maybe have different opinions, and how we engage with the discourse online. I think things get so black and white where I talked about this in my episode about AI and kind of alluded to this concept that I was planning on talking about, moral grandstanding, because I think things can get so black and white that it's like you either believe Justin or you believe Blake, and everybody else is wrong and corrupt and blind because they have a different opinion. And this is a lot of the discord and division that we are seeing now, especially in America, that just gets fueled more and more, even by people that think that they are, you know, doing this for altruistic reasons, speaking out online for the things that they believe in. There's a lot of, you know, performative virtue signaling that can be embedded in, you know, taking a stance and sinking your teeth into it and not hearing anything else. Whether you're on Baldoni's side or Lively's side or whatever, there can be this thing of like, and one day I will be proven right, and I will have been able to say that all along I was on the right side of history, you know. We also could see this famously in Taylor Swift's cancellation. You know, that was earlier on in kind of the cancel culture time. I think things have shifted a little bit where we're not as fixated on like really taking someone, well, actually, I don't know. I think it's just maybe become more covert, but this idea of really taking someone and just absolutely tearing them down because you believe that they do something that you don't like or you don't agree with. This is even kind of embedded in the Lively and Baldoni case, where these text messages are coming out between Blake Lively and Taylor Swift, and people are outraged. Oh my God, she called him like a little bitch, and you know, they're being so mean, and this is just mean girl behavior, and how horrible this conversation in private text message between two best friends. You know, to me, it can feel like, whoa, where are we forgetting the humanity? And like, what would I feel like if my text messages with my best friends were released, and if I was judged based off of, you know, what I was saying and how I'm supporting someone that I care about, you know, like it just feels like there's a lot of snap judgments and just persecution, condemnation that then is just flooding the internet because how dare they say that or do that? I would never, holier than thou, because I don't know. I think we all have moments where we do things that we wouldn't want projected up onto a billboard, or, you know, we have questionable morals where we believe something, but we maybe act in direct contradiction. Like people love Chick-fil-A and also believe in gay rights, and Chick-fil-A pretty much is in direct opposition to that belief and even funds, you know, organizations and charities that are anti-LGBTQ. You know, that's a moral gray area. And I think to just be so ready to pick up and to throw the first stone, so to speak, to bring it to a religious level, which I'm not oft to do, you know, I find myself bristling against that. And in some ways, the way that I engage about talking about it could also be seen as moral grandstanding. But all of this is just to bring more awareness and acknowledgement to how this stuff plays out. You know, COVID is probably the biggest example of recent history where lines were drawn everywhere. You know, in a Psychology Today article, this author talks about, you know, crossing these lines in COVID meant public ridicule or shaming, whatever side you were on. And it felt almost productive at that time to point out transgressions, to shame someone for not wearing a mask out in public, because how dare they not care about public health? And we were also doing this as a way to exercise autonomy during a crisis where it felt like we really had little control. And when it comes to things like politics or these issues that feel so life or death, but we feel very little control over, that's where we can get even more caught up in this, you know, screaming into the void kind of grandstanding behavior. But what I thought was interesting in this article that he points out is for public health, in this case of COVID, for it to be truly inclusive, its message should be maximally charismatic to attract buy-in from wide swaths of the population, which I thought was a really good point. You know, if we're really interested and activists for these things that we care so much about, there could be a vested interest in being charismatic and welcoming in a larger amount of people to the issue that you care about versus just virtue signaling and being viewed by peers already in your kind of social circle or aligned with your beliefs, being viewed by them as, you know, pious or rightfully righteous and standing up for the thing that you all believe in. So like I said, this is all just to bring awareness, because it's actually not really helpful to condemn a person doing this. It's really more about condemning the act itself and bringing more consciousness to it, especially when it comes to like corporations too. We can see this all the time. Corporations kind of using a virtual signaling thing to be like, look, over here, we do this, while also getting away with things that are problematic and do deserve to be called out. And that brings me back to that point of, you know, this outrage exhaustion really drawing attention away from real injustices when they're occurring. It's like the boy who cried wolf. You know, if we're just shouting about everything all of the time, then we can kind of dilute and lose the attention for things that really do matter and that we can make substantive change around. Okay, so that felt like a marathon. I hope I'm making sense. If you have some reflections or thoughts or questions that pop up around this, or, you know, your own things that you would add, please feel free, leave them in the comments below this episode, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on your favorite podcast platform. I would love to hear from you and share your thoughts with me. This is an evolving topic. Like I said, I don't think I have all the information or even the right ways to articulate all of it, but I wanted to at least try and see what you guys think as well, so we can continue to learn from each other around these really kind of deep, specific, nuanced concepts. And, I think it all ties back to our psychology, our mental health, the way that we interact with the world, the way that we can critically interact with tech and social media and these things that are just more and more becoming intertwined with our everyday, our every moment almost. And to ignore that feels to do a disservice. And if you don't agree with me, you're wrong. Anyway, thank you guys so much for listening, following along so that you never miss an episode. I post every Wednesday, except for when I'm on break. And please send this to a friend that you think might like it. Spark up a conversation with them. And if you really enjoyed it and you would like to take 2 seconds to leave me a 5-star review, that would be wonderful and very helpful and much appreciated. So thanks so much for being here, guys, and I'll catch you next Wednesday. Bye.